I woke up to the sound of a power washer at 6 in the morning, which is never a good sign in a neighborhood like mine. My eyes snapped open and I stumbled to the window, still wearing yesterday's paint-splattered jeans because I'd worked until 2 in the morning putting the final touches on the garage mural, the one I'd spent 3 months creating, the one the HOA Architectural Committee had approved in writing after 4 meetings and countless revisions, the one that depicted the history of Santa Fe in brilliant turquoise, coral, and gold, with images of the Pueblo people, Spanish missionaries, the railroad, and modern artists all flowing together in a narrative that wrapped around my garage door and onto the stucco walls on either side, or rather, the one that had depicted all those things until approximately 10 minutes ago. I watched through my bedroom window as 2 men in white coveralls methodically sprayed industrial primer over every inch of my work. The colors disappeared beneath that stark, lifeless white like a memory being erased. Behind them stood a woman I recognized immediately, her arms crossed over her pastel blue blazer, her highlighted blonde hair sprayed into submission despite the morning breeze. Karen Whitfield, president of the Sunrise Hills HOA board, supervising the destruction of 3 months of my life with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just won an argument she'd been rehearsing in the shower. I was out the door in 30 seconds, barefoot on the cold flagstone path that led around to my garage. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted over the roar of the power washer. Karen turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning, Felix. I'm so glad you're awake. We're addressing a violation that was brought to the board's attention." "What violation?" "You approved this." I gestured at what remained visible of my mural, a single turquoise handprint peeking out from beneath the expanding sea of white. "I have the approval letter. I have the signed forms. I have emails from 3 different board members saying how excited they were about it." "That was before we received complaints from several neighbors about the inappropriate content," Karen said, pulling a folder from under her arm. "And upon review, we realized the approval was given in error. Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants clearly states that all exterior paint must be from the approved palette. Your mural violates at least 6 color restrictions. The approval letter specifically exempted the mural from the standard palette restrictions. It's artwork, not house paint." Karen's smile tightened. "The board has reconsidered its position. As HOA president, I have the authority to revoke approvals that were granted in violation of our covenants. You were sent a violation notice 3 days ago." "I never received any notice. We sent it by email to the address on file." "I never got it," she shrugged, a gesture that made rage bubble up in my chest. "That's not our responsibility. The notice was sent, Mr. Zimmerman. Your failure to check your email doesn't constitute an emergency on our part." One of the men with the power washer had moved to the other side of the garage door. I watched him obliterate the face of an artist I'd spent hours perfecting, a woman whose features I'd based on my grandmother, who'd been one of the original artists at the Santa Fe Indian Market. The white primer covered her like a shroud. "You can't just destroy someone's art," I said, hearing the crack in my own voice and hating it. "There are laws about this. It's painted on HOA-regulated property that you happen to own. The covenants are very clear. All exterior modifications must maintain community standards." Karen glanced at her watch. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a tennis lesson at 7. The crew will be finished within the hour. Please ensure that you do not repaint without proper board approval, or we'll be forced to fine you for repeat violations. The fine schedule starts at $500 and increases exponentially." She walked away, her sensible heels clicking on my driveway, and climbed into a white Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than I'd made in the last 3 years. The license plate frame read, "Boss Lady." I stood there watching the mural disappear for another 20 minutes until there was nothing left but flat, soulless white. The workers packed up their equipment, didn't meet my eyes, and drove away in a truck with Martinez Painting Services on the side. I made a note of the name. They were just doing a job, but I wondered if they knew what they'd destroyed. Back inside, I checked my email. Nothing from the HOA. I checked my spam folder. Nothing. I checked the email address they supposedly had on file and discovered it was an old one I hadn't used in 2 years, since before I'd moved to Santa Fe. I'd updated my contact information when I submitted the mural proposal 6 months ago, but apparently that update had never made it into their system. Or more likely, Karen had deliberately used the old address to provide herself with plausible deniability. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall where I'd hung preliminary sketches of the mural. Each one represented hours of research, conversations with local historians, visits to museums, and consultations with tribal elders who'd been generous enough to share stories with a white artist, trying to honor their heritage rather than appropriate it. I'd approached the project with humility and care, knowing I was an outsider to many of the stories I was trying to tell, but believing that art could bridge those gaps if done with respect and attention. Now it was gone. Just gone. I'm not a violent person. I make art because I believe in creation, not destruction. But sitting there in my kitchen, I felt something dark and furious coiling in my chest, something that wanted to march over to Karen Whitfield's house and give her a piece of my mind in language that would definitely violate the HOA's conduct policies. Instead, I made coffee. Then I opened my laptop and started searching for lawyers. The first 3 firms I called said they didn't handle HOA disputes. The 4th one said they did, but when I explained what had happened, the paralegal who answered the phone told me that HOA cases were very difficult and that I should probably just comply with the board's decision to avoid further conflict. The 5th firm didn't call me back. I was starting to understand why HOAs got away with this kind of thing. Fighting them required resources most people didn't have, time most people couldn't spare, and a willingness to become that neighbor, the one who makes trouble, the one who doesn't just go along to get along. By noon, I'd exhausted my list of local attorneys and was seriously considering just repainting the mural and daring them to stop me. But that would mean fines, possibly a lien on my property, and a legal battle I'd probably lose because I'd be the one in violation. They'd already established the paper trail that made me the bad guy. I was microwaving leftover green chili stew when my phone rang. Unknown number, which I normally don't answer, but I was desperate enough to take the chance it wasn't a spam call about my car's extended warranty. "Is this Felix Zimmerman?" The voice was female, professional but warm, with an accent that suggested she'd grown up somewhere on the East Coast. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Emma Sutherland. I'm an attorney with the Arts Advocacy Alliance out of Albuquerque. I got your name from Diego Martinez. You called his painting company this morning?" It took me a second to connect the dots. The crew that painted over my mural? The same. Diego felt terrible about what happened. He said he didn't realize what he was painting over until it was half gone. And by then, the HOA president was standing right there supervising, and he couldn't afford to lose the contract. But he took some photos before they started, and he thought you might need a lawyer. He took photos? Sent them to me about an hour ago. "Mr. Zimmerman, do you know what the Visual Artists' Rights Act is?" I set down my bowl of stew. "No." "It's a federal law that protects certain works of visual art from destruction or modification, even if the artist doesn't own the physical property the art is attached to. It's part of copyright law. But it goes further. If your mural qualifies as a work of recognized stature, or even if it just qualifies as a protected work of visual art, the HOA may have violated your rights under VARA by destroying it without notice." They claim they sent notice to an email you don't use and only 3 days before destruction. VARA requires 90 days notice for works of recognized stature, and even for other protected works, 3 days is almost certainly insufficient, especially if they used an email they should have known was outdated. I could hear the sound of typing. "Diego's photos are good. Really good, actually. Your mural was signed, correct?" "Yes, bottom right corner, my signature and the date." "That's important. One of the requirements for VARA protection is that the work be signed. Mr. Zimmerman, would you be willing to meet with me this afternoon? I think you might have a case." "I can't afford a lawyer," I said. "I'm a freelance muralist and teaching adjunct. I make enough to cover my mortgage and groceries, but that's about it." The Arts Advocacy Alliance is a non-profit. We take cases on contingency, and if we win, the other side pays our fees. You wouldn't owe us anything unless we recover damages for you, and even then, it comes out of what we win, not your pocket. She paused. I should be clear. This would be a real fight. HOAs have lawyers, insurance companies, and a strong incentive not to back down because it sets a precedent. But what they did to you makes me angry, and I became an arts lawyer specifically to stop people like Karen Whitfield from treating artists like their work doesn't matter. When can we meet? I asked. She laughed, a quick warm sound. I like your energy. How about 2 o'clock at the Collected Works bookstore? There's a cafe in the back where we can talk. I'll be there. After she hung up, I pulled up the Arts Advocacy Alliance website. Emma Sutherland's bio showed a woman in her early 30s with dark hair, pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, wearing a blazer over a t-shirt that said, "Art is not optional." Her credentials were impressive: Columbia Law, a clerkship with a federal judge, and 5 years specializing in intellectual property and artists' rights. Her bio mentioned that she'd grown up in Boston, moved to New Mexico for the light and the art scene, and never looked back. I spent the next 2 hours documenting everything I could remember about the mural project. I found the approval letter from the HOA, dated and signed by Karen Whitfield herself, acknowledging that the mural would use colors outside the standard palette and explicitly approving that deviation. I found emails from 2 other board members expressing enthusiasm about the project. I found my sketches, my research notes, and photos I'd taken at every stage of the painting process. Then I got dressed in actual clean clothes, tried to do something about the paint that was permanently embedded under my fingernails, and drove to Collected Works. Emma Sutherland was already waiting at a table in the cafe, and she looked exactly like her photo except more alive, if that makes sense. Her dark hair was still pulled back, but a few strands had escaped around her face. She wore jeans, a white button-down shirt, and a turquoise pendant that looked Navajo. She was reading through a stack of papers and making notes in the margins when I walked up. "Felix?" She stood and offered her hand. Her grip was firm and confident. "Thanks for meeting me. Thanks for being on time. I have a pathological hatred of waiting." She gestured for me to sit and pushed a coffee across the table. I took a guess. "That's a double espresso. You look like you need it." I did need it. The caffeine hit my system like a blessing. Emma opened a laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a photograph of my mural, taken from an angle that showed the full scope of the work. It was beautiful. I'd known it was good while I was working on it, but seeing it in a photograph, from a stranger's perspective, I could see it the way others must have seen it. The colors were vibrant without being garish. The composition flowed naturally, and the details rewarded close attention. It was the best work I'd ever done. "Diego sent me about 40 photos," Emma said. "He documented the entire destruction process, including timestamps and shots of Karen Whitfield supervising. That's gold from an evidentiary standpoint." She clicked through several more images. "Tell me about your background as an artist." I gave her the short version. "I'd graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design 8 years ago with a degree in painting, moved to New York to try to make it as a gallery artist, discovered I hated the gallery scene and couldn't afford to live in Brooklyn, and eventually drifted west. I'd fallen in love with the muralist tradition in the Southwest, the way public art could transform spaces and tell stories that mattered to the communities where they existed. I'd been in Santa Fe for 3 years, building a reputation slowly through small commissions, teaching a couple of classes at the community college, and working on personal projects like the garage mural. "Have your works been displayed in museums or galleries?" Emma asked. "A few group shows, nothing major." "Have you won any awards or grants?" "A small grant from the New Mexico Arts Division 2 years ago for a mural at an elementary school." She made notes. "Have you sold any works for significant amounts?" "I'm a muralist. I don't really sell the way gallery artists do. I get commissioned to paint walls." "What was your largest commission?" $15,000 for a 3-wall piece at a restaurant in Albuquerque." She nodded, still typing. "Here's the situation. VARA protects works of visual art that meet certain criteria. Your mural absolutely qualifies as a work of visual art. The question is whether it's a work of recognized stature, which gets the highest level of protection, including the requirement for 90 days notice before destruction. Recognized stature is determined by expert testimony, exhibition history, critical reviews, and similar factors. Your background is decent but not bulletproof on that standard." My heart sank. "However," Emma continued, "even if we can't prove it's a work of recognized stature, we We can still argue that it's a protected work under VARA, which means they needed to give you notice and an opportunity to remove the work or pay to have it removed. 3 days' notice sent to an email address they should have known was outdated doesn't cut it. And here's the kicker. VARA allows for statutory damages of up to $150,000 for willful violations. $150,000? That's the maximum. We'd probably get something in the lower range. But yes, this isn't about the market value of the destroyed art. It's about punishing and deterring the violation of your federally protected rights. She leaned forward. Karen Whitfield destroyed your art because she thought she could. She thought her position as HOA president gave her the power to override your rights as an artist. VARA exists specifically to tell people like her that she's wrong. I felt something shift in my chest, that tight knot of anger and helplessness starting to loosen. What do we do? First, I'm going to send a demand letter to the HOA and to Karen Whitfield personally, informing them of the VARA violation and demanding compensation. We'll ask for statutory damages, attorney's fees, and an acknowledgement that they violated federal law. Second, if they don't settle quickly, we file a federal lawsuit. Third, we make this as public as possible. Local media love stories about HOA overreach, especially when it involves art and federal law. You want to go to the press? I want to make it so expensive and embarrassing for them to fight this that settling becomes their only reasonable option. Emma's eyes were bright with what I can only describe as professional joy. Mr. Zimmerman, I've been looking for a case like this. HOAs think they're above the law because they usually are. The cost of fighting them is more than most people can handle, so they get away with petty tyranny. But every once in a while, they pick on someone with a federal statute on their side, and that changes the game. Call me Felix, I said, and I'm in. Whatever it takes. We spent the next hour going through every detail of the project. Emma was thorough to the point of being intimidating, asking questions I hadn't even thought about. Had anyone from the Historical Society seen the mural? Yes, actually. A curator from the Museum of New Mexico had stopped by one afternoon and spent 20 minutes looking at it, and we'd talked about the research I'd done. Did I have her contact information? I thought I could find it. Had any art critics reviewed it? Not formally, but the Santa Fe Reporter had mentioned it in an article about public art in residential neighborhoods. Did I have that article? I'd find it. By the time we finished, Emma had filled 8 pages with notes, and I felt like I'd just been through a deposition. But I also felt something I hadn't felt since 6 o'clock that morning. Hope. I'll have a demand letter drafted by tomorrow afternoon, Emma said, closing her laptop. I'll email it to you for approval before I send it. In the meantime, do not communicate with the HOA except through me. Don't respond to emails, don't go to any board meetings, and definitely don't do anything that could be construed as retaliation. Like what? Like repainting the mural without approval, or painting something new on Karen Whitfield's house, or setting fire to the clubhouse, she grinned. I know you probably weren't planning any of those things, but I have to say it. Clients get creative when they're angry. The thought of repainting had crossed my mind, I admitted. I know, but resist. We have the law on our side, and we have evidence. Let's not muddy the waters. She stood and offered her hand again. It's good to meet you, Felix. I think we're going to do something important here. I hope so, I said, shaking her hand. And Emma, thank you. You have no idea how much this means. I think I do, she said. I've seen what happens when people with power think art doesn't matter. It's part of why I do this job. I drove home feeling lighter than I had all day. The garage was still a blank white canvas, a reminder of what I'd lost, but now it felt less like an ending and more like a pause. Something was going to happen. I didn't know what, but I trusted Emma to make it happen. The demand letter arrived by email the next afternoon, copied to me for review. It was 6 pages of precisely worded legal argument that laid out the VARA violation in terms that even I could understand. Emma demanded $50,000 in statutory damages, full reimbursement of attorney's fees, a written apology, and a commitment from the HOA to establish clear policies for artistic works that complied with federal law. The letter noted that Karen Whitfield, as HOA president and the person who directly supervised the destruction, could be held personally liable for the violation. I approved it, and Emma sent it via certified mail to the HOA's registered agent and to Karen Whitfield's home address. Then we waited. 3 days later, I got a call from Emma. They rejected the settlement offer. That was fast. Their lawyer sent a response this morning. It's exactly what I expected. Lots of bluster about HOA authority, claims that the mural violated the covenants, and an argument that VARA doesn't apply because you authorized the removal by painting on property subject to HOA regulations. She paused. It's nonsense, but it means they want to fight. So we sue. I'm filing the complaint today in federal district court. Are you ready for this to get messy? I looked out my window at the white expanse where my mural had been. I'm ready. The lawsuit made the news faster than I expected. The Santa Fe Reporter ran a story 2 days after we filed with the headline, "Local Artist Sues HOA for Destroying Mural." The article included one of Diego's photos showing the mural in all its glory, contrasted with a photo I'd taken of the blank white wall. It quoted Emma extensively about VARA and artists' rights, and it included a no comment from the HOA's attorney. The reader comments were overwhelmingly on my side. People I'd never met were calling for Karen Whitfield's resignation. Several neighbors I'd exchanged pleasantries with over the years left supportive notes in my mailbox. One of them, an older woman named Patricia, who lived 3 houses down, stopped by with a casserole and a story about how the HOA had forced her to remove a vegetable garden from her front yard because it violated the landscaping standards. "They're bullies," Patricia said, standing on my front step with her hands on her hips. "Every single one of them. You give them a little power and they turn into little dictators. I hope you take them for everything they've got." But not everyone was supportive. I started getting nasty emails from addresses I didn't recognize, people telling me I was destroying property values and making the neighborhood look trashy. Someone left a note on my car that said, "Rules are rules, grow up." And at the next HOA meeting, which I didn't attend but heard about from Patricia, Karen Whitfield gave a presentation about a disgruntled resident who was trying to tear down the community by filing frivolous lawsuits. Emma's response was to file a motion for preliminary injunction, asking the court to order the HOA not to interfere with any future murals I might paint. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, which meant 6 weeks of living in limbo, watching the legal process grind forward while my garage remained a monument to Karen Whitfield's pettiness. I tried to stay busy. I took on a commission to paint a mural at a coffee shop in Albuquerque, a smaller piece that wouldn't consume me the way the garage mural had. I taught my classes at the community college. I went on long runs in the Sangre de Cristo foothills, trying to burn off the nervous energy that kept me awake at night. And I got to know Emma Sutherland. We met regularly to prepare for the case, going over testimony, discussing strategy, and compiling evidence. But somewhere along the way, those meetings started lasting longer than they needed to. We'd finish talking about the lawsuit and then keep talking about other things. I learned that she'd left a high-paying job at a corporate firm in Boston because she woke up one morning and realized she hated everything about her life except her coffee maker. She'd taken a year off, traveled through Mexico and Central America, spent 3 months volunteering at a legal clinic in Guatemala, and come back with a clear sense that she wanted to use her law degree to protect people who created things rather than protect corporations that destroyed them. "I know that sounds naive," she said one evening over drinks at a bar near the plaza. "The whole, I want to make a difference thing. But it's true. I'd rather make $40,000 a year doing something that matters than $200,000 defending pharmaceutical companies in patent disputes." "That doesn't sound naive," I said. "It sounds brave." She shrugged, but I could see she was pleased. "My parents think I'm insane. They paid for Columbia, and I'm working for a nonprofit in New Mexico. But I'm happy, you know. I wake up in the morning and I actually want to go to work. How many people can say that?" "Not me," I admitted. "I mean, I love painting, but most days I wake up stressed about money and whether I'll get enough commissions to keep the lights on." "That's the system," Emma said. "We tell artists that their work is important, that it makes life worth living, And then we structure the economy so that making art is financial suicide. It's obscene. She took a sip of her margarita. That's part of why your case matters. It's not just about you and your mural. It's about whether artists have rights, or whether they're just supposed to accept that people with money and power can erase their work whenever it's convenient. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, about how I'd felt like a failure leaving New York, about the imposter syndrome that dogged me every time I picked up a brush, about the way I sometimes wondered if I should have gone to law school or business school or done something practical that would have made my parents less worried about me. Your parents worry? Emma asked. Constantly. They're both accountants. They believe in stability, retirement plans, and health insurance that actually covers things. I'm their walking nightmare. She laughed. My parents are both doctors. I get it. Every Thanksgiving my dad asks me if I've reconsidered corporate law, and every Thanksgiving I remind him that I'm 32 years old and get to make my own choices. How does he take it? He grumbles, and then tells everyone at dinner about how his daughter is a lawyer, conveniently leaving out the part where I make less than his surgical residence. We talked until the bar closed, and then we stood outside on the street corner where we'd parked in opposite directions, neither of us quite ready to say goodnight. Thanks for the drink, Emma said. And the conversation. I don't usually talk about my family stuff with clients. Is that what I am? A client? She smiled, and it was different from the professional smile she used in meetings. This one reached her eyes. I don't usually wonder what my clients are doing when I'm not with them. What am I doing? I asked. Painting something beautiful, thinking too much, maybe thinking about me. She said it lightly, but there was a question underneath. Definitely thinking about you, I said. Good. She reached out and squeezed my hand just for a second. I'll call you tomorrow about the deposition schedule. Then she was gone, walking to her car, and I stood there on the street corner feeling like I'd just stepped off a cliff into open air. The depositions were scheduled for early October. Karen Whitfield's was first, and Emma invited me to attend, as long as I promised not to react visibly to anything that was said. We met in a conference room at the HOA's lawyer's office, a bland corporate space with beige walls and motivational posters about teamwork. Karen arrived 15 minutes late, wearing a cream-colored suit and carrying a designer handbag. She smiled at her lawyer, ignored Emma, and looked through me like I was furniture. Emma was polite, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. She started with basic questions about Karen's role as HOA president, how long she'd served, what her responsibilities included. Karen answered confidently, clearly feeling like she was on solid ground. Then, Emma pulled out the approval letter, the one Karen had signed authorizing the mural. You signed this document, correct? Emma asked. Yes. And you understood that Mr. Zimmerman would be painting a mural that used colors outside the standard palette? At the time, yes. What changed? We received complaints from residents about the content of the mural. What content specifically? Karen hesitated. It was too bright, too busy. It didn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Did anyone complain that it was offensive or inappropriate? Some people felt it was culturally inappropriate. Emma made a note. Mr. Zimmerman is white, and the mural depicted some Native American imagery. Is that what you're referring to? Yes. Did you consult with any Native American residents or tribal representatives before ordering the mural's destruction? I don't see why that would be necessary. So you destroyed a mural that included Native American imagery based on your own judgment that it was culturally inappropriate without actually asking anyone from that culture? Karen's lawyer objected, but the question hung in the air. Emma moved on, asking about the email notice, the decision to use my old email address, the timing of the destruction. With each question, Karen's confidence eroded a little more. By the time the deposition ended 3 hours later, she looked exhausted and angry. My deposition was scheduled for the following week, and Emma prepared me carefully. They're going to try to make you look like a troublemaker, she said. Someone who doesn't respect community standards, who thinks he's above the rules. Don't get defensive. Just answer the questions honestly and don't volunteer information. The HOA's lawyer, a thin man in his 50s named Gerald Brockton, tried exactly that approach. He asked about every parking ticket I'd ever gotten, every minor violation notice the HOA had sent me over the years. Had I been late paying my dues? Once, because I'd been traveling for a commission. Had I failed to get approval before replacing my mailbox? I hadn't realized I needed approval for a direct replacement. Did I generally think the rules applied to me? I think reasonable rules should apply to everyone, I said. I don't think destroying someone's art without proper notice is reasonable. He asked about my income, my education, my career trajectory. He asked why I'd left New York. He asked if I'd ever been fired from a teaching position. He asked if I had any criminal history. Emma objected to most of it, but I answered calmly. No criminal history. Never fired. Left New York because I wanted to be a muralist, not a gallery artist. I could see Emma watching me with approval, and that helped me stay centered. The hearing on our preliminary injunction motion was scheduled for late October in front of Judge Patricia Morrison. Emma was cautiously optimistic. Morrison is fair, she said. She doesn't like parties who play games, and the HOA's position on the email notice is weak. If we can convince her that VARA applies, we're in good shape. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal, but not intimidating. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with gray hair cut short and reading glasses that she peered over when she wanted to make a point. She listened carefully as both sides made their arguments. Gerald Brockton argued that VARA didn't apply because I'd painted on property subject to HOA regulations, which meant I'd essentially waived my rights by choosing to paint there. He argued that the mural violated the covenants and that the HOA had authority to enforce its rules. He argued that 3 days' notice was sufficient for a work that wasn't of recognized stature. Emma countered that VARA rights can't be waived, that the HOA had approved the mural in writing and couldn't retroactively revoke that approval without cause, and that even if 3 days' notice might theoretically be sufficient, sending it to an email address they should have known was outdated amounted to no notice at all. Judge Morrison asked pointed questions of both sides. She wanted to know why the HOA had approved the mural in the first place if it violated their covenants. She wanted to know why they'd acted so quickly to destroy it. She wanted to know why they hadn't simply asked me to modify it if the issue was certain content. It seems to me, Judge Morrison said, that the HOA had options here that didn't involve destroying Mr. Zimmerman's work. Why the rush? Gerald Brockton didn't have a good answer. The judge took the matter under advisement and said she'd issue a written order within 2 weeks. Emma and I walked out of the courthouse into bright October sunshine. That went well, Emma said. You think so? Morrison was skeptical of their arguments. She kept pushing Brockton on why they acted so fast. That's a good sign. She checked her phone. Do you have time for lunch? I need to eat something before my brain shuts down. We went to a Thai place near the courthouse and ordered too much food. Emma was energized in a way I hadn't seen before, talking through the hearing and analyzing every question the judge had asked. This is what you love, isn't it? I said. The courtroom part. Is it that obvious? You light up when you talk about it. She grinned. I know it's weird. Most lawyers hate litigation because it's stressful and unpredictable. But I love the puzzle of it, you know? Trying to figure out what argument will resonate, what facts matter, how to tell a story that makes the judge see things your way. It's like painting, except with words and legal precedent. I never thought of it that way. Art and law aren't that different, Emma said. They're both about taking raw materials and shaping them into something that communicates meaning. You do it with paint and walls. I do it with facts and statutes. She paused, twirling pad thai around her fork. I envy you sometimes. What you create lasts. People see it, feel something, and it changes them. What I create disappears into case files. You're changing things too, I said. You're fighting for artists' rights. That matters. I hope so. She looked at me across the table, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. I'm glad this case brought us together, even if we lose, which I don't think we will. I'm glad I met you. We're not going to lose, I said. That's the spirit. Judge Morrison issued her order 12 days later. She granted our preliminary injunction, ruling that I'd established a likelihood of success on the merits of the VARA claim, and that the balance of harms favored protecting my rights over enforcing the HOA's aesthetic preferences. The HOA was ordered not to interfere with any future artistic works I created on my property, pending the outcome of the full trial. Emma called me the moment the order hit the federal docket. We won. We won? The injunction is granted. Morrison wrote a beautiful opinion. She basically said that VARA protects artists from exactly the kind of thing Karen Whitfield did, and that HOA covenants don't override federal law. Felix, this is huge. What happens now? Now we push for settlement. They just lost the first round in front of a federal judge. Their insurance company is going to be very interested in making this go away before we get to a jury trial. She paused. How do you feel? Honestly? I don't know. Relieved, I think, and angry that it had to come to this. That's fair. Look, I'm coming to Santa Fe tonight to celebrate. Are you free for dinner? We met at Geronimo, a restaurant I'd never been to because it was well outside my budget. Emma insisted on treating, said it was a victory dinner, and victory dinners came out of the firm's expense account. We ordered wine and appetizers and entrees that were described in French on the menu. Tell me something, Emma said after we'd toasted to the injunction. What are you going to do with that garage wall? I don't know. Part of me wants to repaint the mural exactly as it was. Part of me wants to paint something entirely new, and part of me wants to leave it blank as a reminder of what they did. All valid options. She studied me over her wine glass. If you could paint anything, anywhere, with no restrictions, what would you paint? Something joyful, I said without hesitation. Something that makes people smile when they see it. Too much art is about suffering or making political statements. I want to make things that remind people life can be beautiful. That's a good mission statement. What about you? If you could litigate any case, what would it be? She thought for a moment. Something that changes policy, not just outcomes. I want to win a case that forces institutions to think differently about how they treat artists. Your case could be that, actually, if we win big, other HOAs will think twice before pulling this kind of thing. We talked until the restaurant started emptying out, until the waiter had refilled our water glasses so many times he was probably ready for us to leave. We talked about art and law and the intersection between them, about whether beauty had a purpose or whether its existence was purpose enough, about how to live a meaningful life in a world that measured success in dollars and square footage. When we finally left, Emma walked me to my car. The night was cold and clear, stars visible despite the city lights. I'm not good at this, Emma said suddenly. At what? At being professional when I don't want to be professional anymore. She looked at me directly. You're my client. I have rules about this, but I keep breaking my own rules. What rules are those? Don't get personally involved. Don't blur the lines between work and life. Don't fall for clients. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading from a list. I'm breaking all of them. I stepped closer. What happens if you break them? No, I don't know. That's the terrifying part. But she didn't step back. I kissed her then, standing in the parking lot behind Geronimo under stars that had watched over Santa Fe for centuries. She kissed me back, her hand coming up to touch my face, and for a moment the whole complicated mess of the lawsuit and the HOA and everything else disappeared. When we broke apart, she was smiling. That was unprofessional. Probably. I don't care. Good. The settlement negotiations started 2 weeks later. The HOA's insurance company sent a representative to meet with Emma, and they offered $25,000 plus attorney's fees to make the case go away. Emma rejected it. They violated federal law, she told me on the phone after the meeting. They destroyed your art because they could. $25,000 is an insult. We're asking for $75,000 plus fees, a written apology, policy changes, and something else I want to propose to you. What's that? I want them to commission you to paint a new mural, not on your garage, somewhere public, somewhere everyone in the community will see it, and I want it to be part of the settlement that they can't interfere with your artistic choices. Where would I paint it? I was thinking the Clubhouse. It's blank builder beige stucco right now, visible from the main road, and it would make a statement about artists' rights that everyone would see every day. The idea was audacious, it was perfect. They'll never agree to that, I said. Maybe not, but let's ask. Worst case, they say no and we go to trial. Best case, you get to turn Karen Whitfield's Clubhouse into a canvas. The negotiations dragged on through November. The insurance company came up to $40,000, then $50,000. Emma held firm at $75,000 plus the mural commission. They argued that commissioning a mural was outside the scope of normal settlement terms. Emma argued that restoring my reputation and providing me with an opportunity to create public art was exactly the kind of equitable remedy a court would order. Finally, in early December, they agreed to a settlement conference in front of a magistrate judge. We all met in a conference room at the federal courthouse, Emma and me on one side, Gerald Brockton and a nervous-looking insurance adjuster on the other, with Magistrate Judge Stephen Chen mediating. Judge Chen listened to both sides for about 30 minutes, then called everyone into separate rooms. He spent an hour shuttling back and forth, carrying offers and counteroffers, pushing both sides to compromise. When he finally brought us back together, he had a proposal. "Here's what I think is fair," he said. "The HOA will pay $65,000 in statutory damages plus $70,000 in attorney's fees and costs. Mr. Zimmerman will execute a release of all claims, and here's the creative part. The HOA will grant Mr. Zimmerman a license to paint a mural on the exterior of the clubhouse, with the understanding that the design is subject to his sole artistic discretion. The only restrictions are that it must be family-friendly and not contain any content that would be considered obscene under applicable law. Once completed, the mural becomes the property of the HOA and will be maintained by them. Additionally, they will issue a public statement acknowledging that they acted without proper notice under VARA." Emma looked at me. I nodded. "We accept," Emma said. Gerald Brockton consulted with the insurance adjuster, who made a phone call that lasted 5 minutes. When he came back, he nodded. "We accept," Brockton said. Judge Chen smiled. "Excellent. I'll have the settlement agreement drafted by end of business tomorrow. Congratulations to both sides on a reasonable resolution." Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I was floating. Emma grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "You're going to paint the clubhouse," she said. "I'm going to paint the clubhouse." "What are you going to paint?" "I have no idea, but it's going to be amazing." The settlement agreement was signed 2 weeks before Christmas. The HOA issued a statement that was posted on their website and emailed to all residents, acknowledging that they had destroyed my mural without proper notice under federal law, and that they had settled the dispute by compensating me and commissioning a new work. Karen Whitfield's name appeared nowhere in the statement, but everyone knew who was responsible. I heard through Patricia that Karen had tried to fight the settlement, had argued loudly at a board meeting that the HOA shouldn't have caved, that they should have gone to trial. But the other board members, faced with the prospect of a trial that could cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees and potentially result in an even larger judgment, had voted to accept the settlement. Karen had resigned from the board 3 days later. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that. Mostly I felt tired. The whole process had taken 4 months, and even though we'd won, even though I was getting paid and getting to paint the clubhouse, something had been lost that couldn't be recovered. The original mural was gone. The trust I'd had in my community was gone. I'd learned that people who smiled and waved at you in the grocery store could also take away something you'd poured your heart into if they had the authority and the will to do it. But I also had Emma. We'd officially started dating after the settlement was signed, once she was no longer ethically bound by the attorney-client relationship. We spent Christmas together in Albuquerque, meeting her parents for a dinner that was exactly as awkward as she'd warned me it would be. Her father asked me 3 times what my backup plan was if the art thing didn't work out. Her mother asked if I had health insurance and seemed genuinely distressed when I said I was on a high-deductible catastrophic plan. But afterward, driving back to Santa Fe in Emma's car, she leaned over and kissed my cheek. "They liked you. Your dad thinks I'm a financial disaster. He thinks everyone's a financial disaster. He keeps telling me I should have been a cardiologist." She smiled. "But he told my mom you seemed like a good person. That's high praise." "What did your mom say?" "She said you have kind eyes and that I looked happy," which I am. I spent January designing the clubhouse mural. The building itself was a rectangular structure about 50 feet long and 20 feet high, with blank stucco walls that faced the main entrance to the subdivision. It was prime real estate for a mural, visible to every resident and visitor. I wanted to do something different from the garage mural. That piece had been about history, about the layers of culture that made Santa Fe what it was. This piece needed to be about community, about the idea that we were all living together in this space and needed to find ways to coexist that honored everyone's humanity. I sketched dozens of concepts. Some were too abstract, too hard to read from a distance. Some were too literal, too much like an inspirational poster. I wanted something that would reward close attention, but also work as a unified composition from far away. Finally, I landed on an idea: a garden. Not a realistic representation, but a stylized, almost dreamlike vision of plants, flowers, and trees growing together in wild profusion. I'd include native New Mexico plants like yucca and chamiza, alongside roses and sunflowers and morning glories. Birds would nest in the branches, butterflies would float through the scene, and woven through the vegetation would be subtle images of hands planting, watering, tending the garden, hands of different colors and ages working together to create something beautiful. I showed the sketches to Emma over dinner at my place. She studied them carefully, then looked up with bright eyes. "It's perfect," she said. "It's saying that community is something we create together, right? Not something that's imposed from above." "Exactly. Karen Whitfield is going to hate it. She doesn't have a say. That's the beauty of the settlement agreement, my sole artistic discretion." Emma grinned. "I'm so glad I put that language in there." I started painting in February, on a series of bright, cold days when the sun warmed the stucco walls enough that the paint flowed smoothly. I worked from sunrise until the light faded, taking breaks to eat and stretch and warm up my hands. Residents stopped by to watch, some curious, some supportive, some clearly skeptical, but keeping their opinions to themselves. Patricia came by every few days with thermoses of coffee and homemade cookies. "It's beautiful," she said, watching me fill in a section of purple salvia. "It makes the whole entrance feel alive." Other artists from the community started showing up too. A sculptor I knew from the farmer's market spent an afternoon helping me map out the proportions. A painter I'd met at the community college brought her students to watch and ask questions about technique. The curator from the Museum of New Mexico, who'd seen my original mural, stopped by and spent an hour discussing the symbolism of the garden. "You should document this process," she said. "The museum has a program for preserving public art, and we'd be interested in adding this to our archive. What you're doing here, the story behind it, that matters." I started taking photos at the end of each day, documenting the mural's growth. Emma helped me set up a simple website to share the progress, and people started following along. The Santa Fe Reporter did another article, this time with the headline, "Artist Transforms HOA Clubhouse After Legal Victory." The article included interviews with residents, most of whom were enthusiastic about the mural. One woman said it made her proud to live in the neighborhood. Another said it was nice to see something beautiful instead of just blank walls. Not everyone was happy. Someone left an anonymous note on my car saying the mural was ugly and I should be ashamed. Another note said I was destroying property values. But those voices were quieter now, drowned out by the majority who seemed genuinely pleased with what was emerging. It took 6 weeks to complete the mural. The final section was a massive cottonwood tree on the eastern end of the building, its branches spreading across the wall and sheltering the garden below. I painted the last leaf on a Sunday afternoon in late March, stepped back and looked at what I'd created. It was good. Better than the original garage mural, actually. I'd grown as an artist through the process of losing that first piece, through the anger and frustration and legal battle. This mural was more confident, more assured, more willing to take risks with color and composition. The garden seemed to pulse with life, the hands tending it almost invisible unless you looked closely, a suggestion rather than a statement. Emma showed up just as I was cleaning my brushes. She'd been in Albuquerque for a mediation on another case, and she'd driven straight to Santa Fe to see the finished piece. She stood in front of the mural for a long time without saying anything, just looking. I waited, nervous in a way I hadn't been nervous about my work in years. Her opinion mattered. Finally, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Felix, it's extraordinary." "You really think so?" "I think it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen you do. And I think everyone who drives through that entrance is going to be better for seeing it." She walked over and took my hand. "You turned something ugly into something beautiful. That's a kind of alchemy. The official unveiling was scheduled for the first Saturday in April. The HOA board, under new leadership after Karen's resignation, had agreed to host a community event to celebrate the mural's completion. They set up tables with refreshments, hired a local band to play acoustic music, and invited the press. I was nervous about the whole thing, worried that it would feel performative or that protesters would show up, but Emma convinced me it was important. "You won," she said. "Not just the legal case, but the larger battle about whether artists deserve respect and protection. Let people celebrate that. Let them see what's possible when someone stands up to institutional power." The turnout was bigger than I expected. Hundreds of people showed up, residents and non-residents, artists and activists, and just curious folks who'd read about the case in the paper. Kids ran around the lawn in front of the clubhouse. Adults stood in groups drinking lemonade and talking. The band played covers of folk songs from the 60s and 70s. The new HOA president, a friendly man in his 40s named Richard Tompkins, gave a short speech about the importance of art in building community and acknowledged that the HOA had made mistakes in how they'd handled the original situation. He thanked me for my patience and for creating something that would enhance the neighborhood for years to come. Then he asked me to say a few words. I hadn't prepared a speech. I walked up to the microphone set up near the mural and looked out at all those faces, and for a moment I couldn't think of anything to say. Then I saw Emma standing in the front row, smiling at me with absolute confidence, and the words came. "A year ago, I thought art was something you created alone in your studio or on a wall. You had a vision, you executed it, and if people liked it, that was great. If they didn't, well, at least you'd been true to your vision." I paused, looking at the mural behind me. But this process taught me that art is actually about relationships. It's about the relationship between the artist and the subject, between the artwork and the viewer, between the individual and the community. When my first mural was destroyed, it felt personal, like someone had erased a part of me, and in a way, they had. But they also gave me something unexpected. They gave me a reason to fight, and in fighting, I found people who believed that art matters, people like Emma Sutherland, who used her legal skills to protect artists' rights, people like Diego Martinez, who documented what happened because he knew it was wrong, people like Patricia Chen, my neighbor, who brought me coffee and moral support when I was ready to give up, and all of you who showed up today to say that art belongs in our communities, not despite the complications it might create, but because of them. I took a breath. This mural is about gardens, but it's also about what it takes to make something grow. It takes many hands, different people with different skills, all working towards something beautiful. That's what we did here. And I hope when you look at this wall, you see not just paint and color, but a reminder that we're all tending the same garden. Thank you. The applause was genuine and warm. People came up afterward to shake my hand, to tell me their own stories of HOA disputes or bureaucratic frustrations, to thank me for standing up. A professor from the art department at the University of New Mexico asked if I'd be interested in teaching a summer workshop on public art and community engagement. A gallery owner from Taos said she'd love to do a show of my preliminary sketches and studies. But the best moment came later, after most of the crowd had dispersed and the sun was starting to set behind the Jemez Mountains. I was sitting on the lawn with Emma, both of us tired and happy, when a girl about 8 years old walked up to us. "Are you the painter?" she asked me. "I am. I like the butterflies. Can I be a painter when I grow up?" "You can be anything you want," I said. "But yes, you can definitely be a painter." "Will someone paint over my paintings?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Emma and I exchanged a look. "Maybe," I said honestly. "But if they do, you fight back. You find people who believe in you and you make something even better, and you never stop painting, no matter what anyone says." The girl considered this, then nodded seriously. "Okay. I'm going to paint a butterfly on my wall at home. Your parents are okay with that?" "I'll ask them." She ran off toward a couple standing near the refreshment table. Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. "You gave her good advice." "I hope so. She'll remember this day." Years from now, she'll remember that she met an artist who fought for his work and won, and maybe that will give her courage when she needs it. We sat there as the light faded and the stars began to appear, the mural glowing in the last rays of sunset. The garden I'd painted seemed almost alive in that light, the colors deepening and the shapes taking on dimension. It would be there tomorrow and the next day, and hopefully for years to come, a reminder that beauty can grow from conflict, that what's destroyed can be rebuilt, and that communities are stronger when they make space for art. 3 months later, Emma and I were back at the federal courthouse for a different kind of hearing. One of Karen Whitfield's neighbors had filed a complaint with the district attorney's office, arguing that Karen's destruction of the mural constituted criminal mischief under New Mexico law. The DA had investigated and found sufficient evidence to file charges. Emma wasn't representing me this time, since the criminal case was separate from our civil lawsuit, but she came with me to the arraignment as moral support. We sat in the back of the courtroom and watched as Karen Whitfield, looking older and smaller than I remembered, stood before Judge Morrison and pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of criminal damage to property. The judge sentenced her to probation, community service, and restitution to cover the cost of materials for the original mural. She also ordered Karen to take a class on property rights and federal art protection laws. It was a minor punishment, all things considered. But watching Karen acknowledge in open court that she'd committed a crime by destroying my work gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. Afterward, Emma and I walked to the plaza and sat on a bench near the obelisk monument. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like it's finally over. Is that a good thing?" "I think so." I turned to look at her. This whole experience changed my life, not just the lawsuit, but everything that came from it. Meeting you, learning to fight for my work, understanding that art isn't just something I do alone in my head, but something that exists in the world and affects other people. "You've changed my practice too," Emma said. "I'm taking on more artists' rights cases now. Word has gotten around that we'll fight for creators, and people are reaching out. I'm building something that matters." "So what happens now?" she smiled. "Now we keep going. You paint, I litigate, we build a life together and see where it leads." That simple? That simple. We sat there in the afternoon sun, watching tourists take photos and kids chase pigeons and artists set up their wares under the portal. Santa Fe moved around us, beautiful and complicated and imperfect, a city that had always made space for people who created things. I thought about the mural on the clubhouse wall, about the garden I'd painted, and the hands tending it. I thought about the little girl who wanted to paint butterflies, about Patricia bringing me coffee during those hard months, about Diego Martinez taking photos because he knew something wrong was happening. I thought about Emma sitting across from me in a coffee shop 7 months ago, telling me that art mattered and that she'd fight for my rights. About the way she'd stood up in court and argued with passion and precision that artists deserve protection under the law. And I thought about Karen Whitfield, standing in my driveway supervising the destruction of my work, so certain of her authority, so convinced that power gave her the right to erase what I'd created. She'd been wrong. The law had proven her wrong. The community had proven her wrong. And in the end, her attempt to silence my art had given me a bigger canvas and a stronger voice. 6 months after the clubhouse mural was completed, Emma and I stood in front of a different wall in Albuquerque's downtown district. The Arts Advocacy Alliance had secured funding for a public art initiative, partnering with the city to commission murals from local artists. Emma had recommended me for one of the commissions, and after a competitive application process, I'd been selected. This wall was massive, the side of a 4-story building that faced Central Avenue. The city wanted something that represented the diversity and resilience of New Mexico communities. I'd proposed a piece that built on the garden concept from the clubhouse, but expanded it into something more ambitious. A landscape that moved from desert to mountains to high plains, with people from different cultures and time periods inhabiting the space together, not in conflict, but in coexistence. "It's going to take you 6 months to finish this," Emma said, looking up at the blank wall. "Probably longer. You ready?" I squeezed her hand. "I'm ready." We'd gotten engaged 2 weeks earlier, in a moment that was characteristically us. We'd been hiking in the Pecos wilderness, 8 miles from the nearest road, when we'd stopped by a stream to eat lunch. Emma had pulled out sandwiches and apples in a ring box. "I know I'm supposed to make this romantic," she'd said, "but honestly, I just want to spend my life with you. You make me better. You make me want to fight harder and create more space in the world for beauty. So, Felix Zimmerman, will you marry me?" I'd said yes before she'd finished the question. Now, standing in front of this enormous wall with the whole city around us, I felt the same sense of possibility I'd felt that day by the stream. The world was full of walls waiting to be transformed. There would be challenges, resistance, people who thought art was frivolous or dangerous or too expensive, but there would also be people like Emma, who understood that creativity was worth protecting, and people like Diego, who documented injustice when they saw it, and people like the little girl who wanted to paint butterflies, who would carry the belief that art matters into the next generation. I picked up a brush, dipped it in turquoise paint, and made the first mark on the wall. Emma stood beside me, her hand on my back, and together we watched the color bloom against the concrete. This was what I'd fought for, not just the right to paint this particular wall, but the principle that artists deserve respect, protection, and space to create. The legal victory against the HOA had been important, but it was just the beginning. Real change would come from every artist who refused to be silenced, every lawyer who took on cases that protected creative rights, every community that chose to make room for beauty instead of bulldozing it in the name of conformity. The garden I'd painted on the Clubhouse had become something of a landmark in the neighborhood. People gave directions using it as a reference point. Wedding parties took photos in front of it. Kids played on the lawn beneath it while their parents chatted. It had become part of the community's identity, proof that art could transform spaces and bring people together. And Karen Whitfield? I'd heard she'd moved away, sold her house, and relocated to Arizona. I didn't take any pleasure in that. What had happened wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about establishing boundaries, about saying that some things matter enough to fight for even when the odds are stacked against you. Emma started coming to the wall with me most evenings after work, bringing dinner and keeping me company while I painted. Sometimes she'd read briefs while I worked, occasionally looking up to watch my progress. Other times we'd just talk, discussing her cases or my next project or where we wanted to go on our honeymoon. "I was thinking New Mexico," I said one evening while filling in a stand of aspen trees. "We live in New Mexico." "Exactly. We could do a road trip, visit all the places we haven't seen yet, Chaco Canyon, the Very Large Array, Carlsbad Caverns, stay in weird motels and eat at local diners." Emma considered this. "That sounds perfect, actually. Everyone expects you to go somewhere exotic for a honeymoon. But why would we want to be anywhere except here?" Here had become shorthand for more than just geography. It meant the life we were building, the work we were doing, the community we'd become part of. It meant choosing to stay and fight and create rather than running when things got hard. The Albuquerque mural took 8 months to complete. I worked through summer heat and fall wind and early winter snow. The composition evolved as I painted, responding to the wall's texture and the changing light at different times of day. I added elements I hadn't planned, a family of roadrunners darting through prickly pear cactus, a lightning storm over distant mountains, a field of wild sunflowers that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. The final element was a phrase I'd been mulling over since the settlement. "We tend the garden together." I painted it in subtle letters that wove through the vegetation, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. Emma noticed it immediately when she came by that evening. "That's from your speech at the Clubhouse unveiling," she said. "It felt like the right way to sign off on this piece. It's perfect." The city held a dedication ceremony in March, exactly 1 year after I'd finished the Clubhouse mural. The mayor came, along with the director of the Arts Alliance and representatives from the neighborhood association. But more importantly, regular people showed up, hundreds of them, coming to see what had been created on that blank wall. I didn't give a long speech this time. I just thanked everyone who'd made the project possible and invited people to see themselves in the work, to find their own stories in the landscape I'd painted. Afterward, Emma and I walked through Old Town, hand in hand, talking about the future. We'd set a date for the wedding in October. We were looking at houses with studios where I could work and offices where Emma could spread out her case files. We were planning a community arts program, that would provide free legal services to artists facing copyright disputes, contract issues, or situations like mine. "I've been thinking about something," Emma said as we sat on a bench in the plaza, watching the sunset paint the adobe buildings pink and gold. "What if we turned your case into a teaching tool? I could write it up as a case study for law schools, how VARA works, how to handle HOA disputes, how to leverage public pressure in settlement negotiations. It could help train the next generation of arts lawyers." Would people be interested in that? Are you kidding? Your case has already been cited in 2 other VARA lawsuits. We're creating precedent here. She squeezed my hand. "We're changing how the system works." I leaned back and looked up at the sky, which was turning deep purple as the stars emerged. A year ago, I'd been standing in my driveway, watching my work disappear beneath white primer, feeling helpless and erased. Now I had a federal court victory, 2 major murals completed, a woman I loved sitting beside me, and a sense that my work mattered beyond just the aesthetic pleasure it might give viewers. The fight with the HOA had been painful and expensive and exhausting. But it had also taught me something essential, that art isn't a luxury or an indulgence. It's a fundamental part of what makes us human. And when institutions try to erase it, whether through deliberate destruction or benign neglect or bureaucratic indifference, it's worth fighting back. Not everyone will win that fight. I'd been lucky in a lot of ways. Lucky that Diego took photos, lucky that Emma existed and was willing to take my case, lucky that Judge Morrison understood the importance of protecting artists' rights. But even in losing, there's value in fighting. There's value in standing up and saying that what you create matters, that your vision deserves to exist in the world, that power doesn't give anyone the right to silence you. Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. "It's Patricia. She says the neighborhood association wants to commission another mural, this time on the fence around the community pool. Are you interested?" I thought about that fence, a long expanse of blank cinder block that could be transformed into something beautiful. I thought about kids swimming while surrounded by colorful images, about how art could make even mundane spaces feel special. "Tell her yes," I said. "You don't want to think about it?" "I don't need to think about it. That's what I do now. I paint walls. I transform spaces. I fight for my work when I need to, and I create beauty wherever people will let me." Emma typed out a response, then put her phone away and leaned against me. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right? You took something that could have broken you and turned it into something that changed the world a little bit. We did that together." "Yeah," she said, "we did." We sat there as night fell completely, as tourists and locals drifted past, as musicians set up to play on the plaza and the restaurants lit their candles. Santa Fe glowed around us, ancient and modern and always changing, a city that had survived conquests and occupations and the endless pressure to become something more conventional, more profitable, more controlled. But it hadn't succumbed. Artists kept painting, musicians kept playing, writers kept writing. And when someone tried to silence them, they found ways to fight back. That was the real lesson of the Clubhouse mural and the lawsuit and everything that came after. Art survives because artists refuse to be erased. Communities thrive when they make space for creativity, even when it's inconvenient or controversial, or doesn't fit neatly into approved color palettes. Karen Whitfield had tried to erase my work because she thought she had the power to do so. She'd been wrong about the power, and she'd been wrong about me. I wasn't the kind of person who accepted erasure quietly. And with Emma beside me, with the law on my side, and with a community that ultimately valued beauty over conformity, I'd been able to turn destruction into creation. The garden on the clubhouse wall would stand for years, maybe decades. Kids would grow up seeing it every day, absorbing the message that different elements could coexist and create something beautiful together. Adults would drive past it going to work, maybe taking a moment to appreciate the colors and the care that went into every detail. And artists would see it and know that someone had fought for the right to create it, that VARA wasn't just an abstract legal principle, but a real protection that could make a difference. Emma and I got married in October in a small ceremony at a gallery in Santa Fe surrounded by paintings and sculptures, and friends who believed that art mattered. Diego Martinez was there, along with Patricia and Richard Tompkins and the curator from the Museum of New Mexico. Judge Morrison sent a card congratulating us and noting that she was pleased our case had resulted in such a positive outcome. For our first dance, we chose a song about gardens and growing things, and as we moved across the floor, I looked at Emma's face and saw my future. We would keep fighting for artists' rights. We would keep creating spaces for beauty. We would tend our garden together, just like the hands in my mural, working toward something neither of us could build alone. The clubhouse garden bloomed on its wall. The Albuquerque mural stretched across 4 stories of downtown real estate, and somewhere out there, a little girl was probably painting butterflies on her bedroom wall, believing that art was worth doing because someone had told her it was. That belief mattered more than any legal victory. It mattered more than the settlement money or the publicity or the precedent we'd set. Because in the end, the fight against the HOA hadn't been about money or punishment or revenge. It had been about asserting a simple truth, that creativity is worth protecting, that artists deserve respect, and that communities are better when they choose beauty over conformity. Karen Whitfield had painted over my mural while I slept, thinking that would be the end of it. But she'd been wrong. I'd repainted their precious clubhouse overnight, metaphorically speaking, and in doing so had created something that would outlast all of us. The garden would remain, tended by the community that had embraced it, a living testament to the power of fighting back when someone tries to erase your voice. And every time I drove past it, every time I saw someone stop to take a photo or kids playing on the lawn beneath those painted flowers, I remembered why I'd fought. Not for myself alone, but for every artist who'd been told their work didn't matter, every creative person who'd faced institutional power and felt small, every person who'd ever believed that beauty was worth defending. We'd won. Not just in court, but in the way that matters most. We'd made the world a little more beautiful, a little more just, a little more willing to protect the people who create things. And that victory, unlike any mural, would never fade.